Welcome everybody back to my Close Encounters music production tutorial series. This is episode 3. In the first episode you got basically a bit of a double whammy. You got gain staging and the pink noise trick. Two really crucial things you need to do when you start your mixdowns. If you haven't seen that video, the link is in the cards up on the top of the screen right now, and also down in the description you'll find it. The second episode was about EQ, or specifically what I'd call utility EQ, where we just sort of, get rid of stuff we don't need in the lower and the high end, just to neaten everything up. If you haven't seen any of these videos, the links are up in the cards at the top of the screen and in the descriptions below. Okay, so this one, episode 3, this is a bit of a mixed bag. I'm going to try not to make it too long. I basically there's a couple of things I want to cover in this. I want to be able to sort the EQ, the vocal out in this track. And what I mean by sort it out, there's a couple of issues with it. So let's get started with that first. The vocals on this channel. Let's zoom in so everyone can see it properly. Let me turn down the actual main fader so you can hear me talk. Right, this is the main vocal. Now, you may or may not see, this has already been recorded with compression. You can see the tips of the peaks there. Let's zoom in a bit. There we go, that's a bit better. Right, you can see these flat tops and these flat bottoms. That means that it's been compressed. And that's actually imprinted, that's printed into the vocal. I can't take that off. It's actually part of the recording. It's a bit unfortunate because I actually prefer to work with a vocal that's uncompressed and with no effects. There's also a reverb printed on this as well. So let's quickly hear it. Let's turn it up a bit. There's a long reverb on that. Unfortunately, this compression is a bit overcooked for my taste anyway. It's a bit, it almost sounds like it's overloading. And as a consequence of that, there's actually like a weird frequency in there that's sort of a bit sharp on the ears, which is what I want to take care of. So let's cycle around one of the parts that we're talking about. Let's put that onto quantize so we can move it around. It's that. So she says can never be, and when she holds the note, can never. That's this section here, and there's a. It sounds really overloaded actually, and I'm a bit gutted because there's nothing I can do about that. I can try and clean it up a little. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cycle it so that it plays over and over, and then I'm going to load up the EQ that we did, the utility EQ. Right, now, hang on, let me turn it down a little bit. Okay, so with the Pro Q3, if you just hold your mouse, don't have to push any buttons, just put your mouse down in the scope there, you see that it draws this outline and it actually gives you peaks that potentially could be causing you trouble. Now, I'm guessing, I think the problem that I'm speaking about is this area here. It's definitely something to do with those two. So let's put a node in. We'll just double click on the line and it puts a node in. Let's solo it. That's the bit I'm talking about. It's that frequency there. I think that's causing problems. Now, there's a couple of ways we can approach this. We can just literally do a cut. Probably about 2 dB would do it. It's actually smoothed that right out. that is actually sorted out. However, it's a fixed EQ. And there's parts of the vocal that actually don't need to be they don't need that cut in certain parts of the vocal. Let's play the whole vocal. See, all around there it's a bit more gentle. So we don't actually need that actual cut all the way through it. We just need it in the sections where I'm talking about, where she holds that note and it's a bit sharp. So what we can do with the Pro Q3 is use a dynamic EQ. And this is really what I wanted to talk about, because this is a real game changer if you get your head around how this works. So let's put that back to 0 and loop it again round the bit we want to. Let's just do a cut there so we could loop this one section. That's better. Right. So we've identified where the actual problem, let's make this a bit bigger. We've identified where the actual problem is. It's this 987-ish hertz. Now, dynamic EQ, instead of doing like a cut or a boost and it stays there, you can do this dynamically. So what we've got the node that we're actually going to affect. We're going to use for the center of the dynamic EQ. Now we've got the main gain button, gain knob, which if we just turn up and down, just does what I did with when I'm dragging it with the mouse. All right. But we've also got an outer ring, which we can manipulate. We can turn up and down. Now, if we want to do a cut, we turn it down. So it's giving it a dynamic range. Let's say 2 dB for now. You see that? It's 2 dB. Now, what this does is, the dynamic EQ, what it actually does is automatically cut or boost. If you've got it boosted, it'll automatically boost it as well. But in this case, we're talking about a cut. It automatically does the cut when that certain frequency hits a threshold and brings it down. So let me play it just to, you'll see an automatic dip. See that? So now when I play the whole vocal, it cuts in and out, but there's certain places where it doesn't affect it. Thus leaving the rest of the vocal alone. And you just literally drag up and down the amount you want it to actually cut. If you want to do like a real deep cut, just drag it down further. It's a bit more noticeable like that though. And then you can adjust the Q so it's a narrow band. And there you go. That's dynamic EQ. That's how you do it. In actual fact, let's bring that up a little touch. So if I solo it, this is what it's actually. That's what it's removing. Yeah, so that smoothed it right out. Let's play it in context with the track. See, it's not touching some of it. Right, so that's sort of smoothed it out and it actually cleared it up a little bit. I can now turn it up a little bit louder, and it sounds as though it's got a bit more clarity to it than it did. It sounded a bit muffled because this compression is a bit overcooked. It's actually making it sound muffled, to my ear anyway. I think that's sort of cleaned it up a bit.
Different boy, a different girl.
Let's bypass it.
We come from different worlds. Thought you'd never notice me.
Let's bypass it.
Thought our love could never be. Thought our love could never be.
It's definitely making it sound better to me. That sounds better to me. So what I'm going to do is save it by hitting Command S. That's on a Mac. On a PC, it's Control S. Pretty standard stuff. We'll save that as it is. Now, because it's already compressed, I'm sort of don't want to compress it anymore. But there are certain places where the vocal sort of drops below where it sort of disappears.
Different boy, a different girl.
I mean, you can actually physically see the level difference between there and say here and here where it starts. Now the idea of compression, I'll try and demonstrate for you this. What's the best one to use to, probably the Fab filter. Fab filter C2, which is ironically not one I use a lot, to be fair. But this gives you a good graphical sort of idea of what's going on. Let's turn it down, so I can talk.
Thought our love could never be.
Now, all a compressor does really is a volume control. It's similar to like an automatic volume control. So if you can imagine you had a sound on a fader where some parts of it are very quiet and other parts are very loud. So you've got a lot of dynamic range in there. And when you play the whole track, in the very quiet parts of this track, you have to turn the fader up in order to hear it above the track. But of course, when it gets to the bit where it's louder, it's too loud. You have to turn it down again. And you'd have to constantly sit there with your finger on the fader, turning it up and down to make sure that the balance stays right. What a compressor does is sort of automate that process, if you like. That's more or less what a compressor does. So how it does this is it basically turns down the volume based on a threshold that you set. If a volume of something goes over whatever threshold you set, it will pull down the volume by a certain ratio. So like this is the default. So at the moment we're set at minus 18 dB with a ratio of 4:1, meaning that every decibel over the threshold the signal goes, it will pull down 4 times that amount, 4:1. So gentle compression would be something like 2:1. That's a pretty gentle compression. Hard compression. I mean, this goes up to 100 to 1. You probably won't ever use that unless you're using it for an effect. For this vocal, because it's already compressed, I don't want to give it too much. So I'm going to try 2:1. And we'll take it to the loudest part, which is actually the bit that I've just EQ'd. So you'll see the volume in this line, and you'll see it around the threshold. Now you can turn it up and down. So if I turn it, so you see up on the scope here, that's the amount that is actually pulling down the volume because it's gone over the threshold. Cycle it. So what you're actually seeing, you're seeing the original volume there, the volume after it's been compressed, and the amount it's compressing in dB. And you also get it on your VU meter here. Again, brilliant graphical interface, shows you loads of stuff that you can. It's very useful to see. So I said 2 to 1. And we've got what they call a soft knee. So it's a gentle, very gentle. The compression cuts in gently as opposed to sharply if you got a hard knee. So we can change it to soft to hard. We don't really want it. We just want it where it was, to be honest. What you'll find a lot of these plugins, when you load the presets, when you first load them up, the default usually is not far away from what you actually need. Now the idea is to turn down the highest volume parts and turn up the lower parts, the quieter parts, and even it out if you like. So we'll demonstrate. I'll demonstrate on this one just to see what happens. So at the quiet parts, it's not compressing hardly. It's not hardly touching it. That's what we want. We don't really want to compress this. We just need to. Maybe a little tiny bit more. Okay, so then you've got this attack and release, which is the attack is how long the compressor takes after the signal goes over the threshold to cut in, and the release is how long it takes to come off. So experiment with those because it's not. It's a bit weird. Depending on what you're trying to achieve is how you would set those. So that's pretty much, I mean, that's very simplistic compression. And also the brilliant thing with this compressor, the ProSeath 2, is very what they call transparent. So it doesn't add any colour to anything you put through it unless you want it to. I think there's other settings in it that you can, like, at the moment it's set to clean. You've got all these different types. The best thing to do is just mess around with them. But I want it clean because obviously I've got a compressed signal. And most engineers would probably tell you not to compress it again. But I think I've got away with that. It's definitely smoothed it out a bit. So what you end up with, you get the threshold. So whatever the amount it goes over, whatever threshold you set, it pulls down the volume. And then we've got auto gain on. So if I didn't have that on, it turns down the actual volume of it, right? So, you know, let's do an extreme. It's almost disappeared, you see, because it's being compressed and pulled down so far. Auto gain, you'll get this on a lot of compressors where if you hit that, it tries to automatically compensate for the amount that you've brought it down. Do you see what I mean? If you haven't got auto gain, good practice is to think, right, well, we're getting maybe 3 or 4 dB of gain reduction. So then you would just turn your main output. No, sorry, it's this one. Sorry, your main output up by 3 dB, and that would compensate. So do you see what I mean? So because you've brought down the loud things to bring up the high things, it's all come down in volume. Then you need to turn the whole thing up, and therefore you get a more even volume to things. That's sort of what compression is. Basically, that's what it is. I'm sorry if I'm not very clear, but I'm not an engineer. I'll sort of try and tell you things the way I do things, and hopefully you sort of get it. So anyway, what else have we got to do on this vocal? So I've EQ'd that weird frequency. I've now slightly compressed it to even out a little bit. Let's just check what it sounds like when everything else is going. Let's turn it up. Now, I'll just explain what I just did while that was playing. I actually dropped a bit more bottom end out, which kind of opened it up. I don't know if you noticed it. It sounded quite sort of muffled. And when I removed a little bit more of the bottom end, it cleared it out. It made it sound clearer over the mix. And you'll often find that with a lot of sounds, not just vocals. You'll find that when you play everything together, because there's so many frequencies going on with so many different instruments, that some sort of clash and what they call mask each other and cancel each other out. And that's partly why I in the first instance got you to, I explained, all the utility EQ, getting rid of frequencies you don't need, because it minimises that. But then after you've done it, you'll probably run into problems like I did with that vocal, where it still sounded quite muffled. Now, some people, especially the uninitiated, would have thought, well, that sounds a bit muffled. I know what I'll do. I'll boost the high end. And that goes back to what I've said before in previous tutorials. You don't need to do that. 9 times out of 10, you don't need to boost stuff. You can get rid of something somewhere else. And then that, to me, sounded like it actually got top end added to it, even though I was taking out bottom end. Experiment with it with this, for yourselves, because the best way to get in your head what I'm talking about is to just try it all out. But you will run into problems if you start boosting high end because things aren't poking through. You will run into trouble, and it will make your mix sound not at its best. Well, the best case scenario. At the worst case scenario, it will sound like a car crash. It will sound awful. So I hope that helps you out. If you've got any questions, put them down in the comments below. If you don't forget to click the links as well. We've got all the other 2 tutorials in the cards up above on the top of the screen right now, and also down in the description. Also, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so that you get informed of anytime I upload a video. That's it for now. I'll upload a new episode 4 I'll be uploading in the next couple of days, or 3 or 4 days. I'm hoping not to be a week this time. A week seems a bit long to wait in between them. So I'm going to sign off now, and I'll catch you all later. Thank you very much for listening. Peace.